Words of Wisdom is brought to you by Essentia Health and TV3 and LB Video Productions.
My name is Mary Vaseka. I've grown up in the Ogema area. My parents were Francis and Andy Safar. I have 4 living siblings and 2 that have passed, or 4 living siblings and myself, and 1 that had passed away. Dave Safar was my brother, passed away. When I say I grew up in the Ogema area, I say that's my claim to fame because I've never lived more than 20 miles from an Ogema address. I don't feel bad that I never left this little town. I mean, I've always been happy here. I'm proud to call it my town, the town where I grew up. I was born just west of Ogema, and my folks moved just a little bit east of Waban I went to Waban school for 3 years. Then we moved out to where I finished growing up and worked a couple years in DL and got married and came back, and I've lived in Ogema since 1961. My dad was born and raised just right west of Waban, and he went to school at the school right here at Ogema that's right next, it's that old building isn't there anymore obviously, but right next door to where I live. And then he actually went to junior college or whatever in Crookston for a year or 2. My mother was born and raised in Canada. She was a Canadian citizen who became an American citizen when her folks moved out here. My dad didn't come from that big a family, but my mother came from a family of, I think it was 14 all told, and the story was told her oldest sister, born and raised in Canada, never left Canada. Her younger siblings were born and raised in the United States, and that whole family never ever all got together at the same time because of the distance and the age. And I don't remember what the age difference was, but it probably had to be at least 20 years between the oldest and the youngest. And then of course they met here locally, I think at a barn dance. I don't remember them ever talking I remember them talking about barn dances and card parties, and that was another fun thing we did in the summertime, or in the Sundays, I guess I'll say. Most of the time we either some relatives came to our house or we went to their house. And so then we get to play with the cousins, and the adults would probably play cards. So that was Sundays were always a fun time where you go to church and have a big dinner at home and then go someplace visiting. And we were in the woods, so we had just a small farm that was common in those days, had a few cattle, a few sheep, pigs, chickens, big garden. I can remember bottle feeding lambs and calves that whether their mothers you rejected them or whatever. I can remember doing that, picking eggs from in the chicken coop from the hens, and some of them, when you try to get their eggs, they'd peck at you, so that wasn't always so much fun. We had our chores after school. We'd haul in all our water because we didn't have running water, and all the wastewater we would haul out. I remember hauling water to the calves down in the barn because they were kept inside. We sold a little bit of cream and eggs here in Ogema. And just a really rural life. Went to a small country school from 3rd grade on to 8th grade. And when I look back now at the social media and the TV and whatever, we just lived such a sheltered life. I mean, we had no idea what was going on in the rest of the world, really. But we were not much money, but we were happy. Had everything we needed. We were never bored. We always found something to do. And I like I said, I had 5 siblings, so I was the oldest, and so we'd make up our own games. We'd play tag, kick the can. Had one I remember having one golf club. I don't know where it came from, but we'd put a little tuna can out in the pasture and hit the ball into that. And we had one old pair of skis. We used to try and ski down the hills. We did have a little pond behind the farm, and we would do a lot of ice skating in the wintertime. Kind of all self-taught, but it was fun. And in the summer, we would walk down to what was called Clark's Bay and swim. And when I think about it now, I think our parents just let us go. I don't think they worried about us drowning or anything. They trusted that we were sensible enough to know what we were doing and take care of ourselves. I don't think they did have phones to check on us, so I've said it was just a whole different life than it is now.
Did you have a car when you guys were growing up as kids?
Yeah, one car, yeah.
Did you go into town often?
We didn't. My dad would bring milk, cream. We had cream. We separate the milk from the cream, and the milk got fed to the animals. But he would bring cream into town once a week, and eggs. If we had extra eggs, then he'd get whatever groceries they needed at Lawrence Crocker's, and that was kind of one of the highlights for us. I'm sure a lot of the older people here remember, but when he would come home, Lawrence would usually have a little bag of penny candy stuck in amongst the groceries someplace for us. But we hardly ever went to town. Our big outing was probably church on Sunday mornings. And as far as going to Detroit Lakes too, it just didn't happen.
So your dad was the grocery shopper?
Yeah, my mother never did learn to drive. I didn't learn to drive till I was in my 30s, and we didn't eat a whole lot of groceries. I mean, we had the milk, we had the meat, we had the garden vegetables, so didn't probably need much more. Bought flour in those, I don't know, were they 25 or 50 pound bags with the printed flour sacks to make dresses out of, or skirts or whatever. And so didn't need a whole lot of groceries. Our bathroom was the outhouse, and the early years I can remember the Sears catalog was our toilet paper, so we didn't need a whole lot of groceries.
What was your favorite thing to do as a kid?
I loved to read. And in school I liked anything that would be kind of a challenge for me, because I think growing up in the country school you were kind of limited if you were, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but if you were a little smarter than the rest of the class, it got to be kind of boring. Which now I think it would be great to be going to school as a more intellectual person and have the opportunities. They just weren't there when we were growing up. You got the same schooling and the same classwork and everything as everybody else did.
We forgot to mention that you were valedictorian of your class.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking about that when I was talking about schooling, and I guess the thing I remember, I think a lot of the class, they knew who the smart kids were, and so there were 3 of us that were at the top of the class, and we were pretty close in our point, very close. Because I think we had a valedictorian, and I can't remember if there were 2 salutatorians. But anyway, every time there would be a test or whatever, the 3 of us would get together and we would compare our test results. So I guess when it came right down to it, I was kind of proud to have been the valedictorian, to be at the top of the class. And another thing I remember, we had desks where we left our paperwork in the bottom part of the desk. And then they would take my stuff home at night and copy it. Bring it back the next day. I'm not even sure I knew they were doing it till later on.
And that's in Waubun.
That was in Waubun when we went to high school, yeah, because I went to that didn't happen in the grade school, but yeah, after I went to Waubun, which was 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. It's 4 grades, so yeah. We had 8 grades in 1 room, 1 teacher. My teacher the first one was Mrs. Munro, and she lived in White Earth. And then Mrs. Harvey Anksman. Angstman was a teacher later on. So I had those two different ones. There were myself and two others in my grade. All the grades were small, and so when we had our classes, the rest of the classes were kind of doing their homework or whatever, and I suppose listening to what the teacher was teaching us. I don't really remember. When the weather was nice, we had softball games. In the wintertime, we'd bring our sleds to school and go sliding down the hills of, I guess probably down the road, really. I'm sure we must have played tag and hide and seek and those kinds of things. I can remember in the wintertime being inside and playing with jacks on the floor, the ball and the little jacks. That's what it was called. I can remember doing that in the wintertime. We brought in water from an outside pump that was right outside the door, brought in water and put it in a water container, and then it came out of a little spigot on the bottom. There was I'm not sure if it was a coal or a wood furnace in the basement, but I think the teacher would come in the morning and start the fire in there. Then we had local people that came and cooked for us. My mother cooked there for a few years and worked with commodities. I can remember cooking a great big, probably a 20-pound turkey. And another thing I remember from the country school, they got a concentrated orange juice, and they would make an orange pudding. That was different but really good. Those are probably the couple. Another thing I remember from the country school, on Valentine's Day, we would make taffy and pull taffy and then eat it, take it home and eat it. My husband, Leroy, he's well known in the area. He's been dead for a few years now. We started out, he had a milk route, and he would go out and there were a lot of little farms in the area, and he would pick up cream cans full of milk every day and bring them we had a creamery in town, so he would bring them into town. I don't know if they sold the milk, but they made butter there. And then, so that was a 7-day-a-week job for him, driving that milk truck. Rain or shine, didn't matter how much snow, he usually managed to get through and pick up the farmer's milk.
Where was the creamery in Ogema?
The building is actually still there. After the creamery closed, it became the fire hall, and it's right across from the M&W convenience store on the corner. It's a big old brick building on the corner. And now Kenny Swedberg has his honeybee stuff there. He bought the creamery or the fire hall from the city. So the original, if you drive by there, you can still see the little cement loading dock is there where they'd put the cream cans and then bring them inside to the building. I think that's still in the front part of the building. And I had 3 kids, Kathy, who's now in Cloquet, Corrine, who passed away when she was 39 from a brain aneurysm, and then my son Andy lives out close to where I grew up, out by the Kay's Corner School. He's got land out there, and I have 6 grandkids and I have 6 great-grandkids. Then our later years, I worked several jobs. I worked a little part-time for Henderson's when they had the grocery store. I worked a little bit part-time for Lawrence Crocker when he had the grocery store. My later years, I worked quite a few years for John Lorsung in Lorsung's Hardware, and my husband worked there also. He did a lot of the small engine repair. And then I worked part-time in the post office as a postmaster replacement. I think those were my working jobs, all kind of part-time. And then, of course, I've been involved in city government for many years. I was elected a clerk in 1980, and I've had that position till 2016, and then I quit because of too much computer stuff with the state. So I gave that job up, and I just helped out for a couple years, and I am currently the city treasurer. I've been that for 4 years, so I've been involved in city government for a long time. I mean, I guess I've been an election judge I don't even know how many years, obviously once I was clerk in 1980, but I remember the early elections, and we had the paper ballots. So the city we'd print up our own paper ballots, and we would have an election in the fall, of course, no primaries. And so we'd probably have a school board election, a city election, a county election, a state election, and a federal election. So we'd probably have 5. And once in a while there might be a separate amendment or something. So we had a separate box for each one. Each ballot was a different color. So we'd have a separate box for each ballot, and when people would come in and vote, they'd get their ballots, and then one of the judges would make sure they got in the right box. Polls were always open from 7 in the morning till 8 at night. And then after we closed the polls, then we would have to count all these paper ballots. Well, thank goodness our town was small, so we never had a whole lot of them, but we would probably start with maybe the smallest one, I don't remember. And then we'd go through and we'd count if we had a mayor election, so we would count that vote first, mark them all off. Then we'd go through the ballots again and count the clerk ballot names. Then when we get done with that, then we'd go on. So we would be there till probably at least 10 or 10:30 counting the ballots. Then we would take all this stuff down to Detroit Lakes yet. So it got to be a really long day. But it was a fun day because all the people in town would come in to vote, so you got to pretty much see everybody and visit with them a little bit. But you know, it's when you think of how that's changed through the years to how we all know it's done now, and to think back to how we used to do it, and we had our own systems of stacking the ballots and the Republican from the Democrat and whatever stuff, and there would be 3 or 4 judges that would count, but at the end of the night we were pretty tired.
What was Ogema like during that time?
When I first moved to town, there were 3 grocery stores and I think 2 gas stations. There was a little place that I think bought and sold eggs, a barber shop and a beautician shop, cafe, of course the bank and the school and the churches. And then, you know, slowly, one by one, and a cafe, one by one, those places, and always a liquor store. The liquor store's been there a long time, plus another bar. So it was a busy little town.
So what was it like working in a small town hardware store? What kind of things did you sell in there?
We sold everything. Some of the customers used to say, if Lorsung's doesn't have it, you don't need it. And we did. I mean, people would come in and they had been looking for something in Detroit Lakes, and then they'd come back here and we had it. Everything, whatever you could think of, we sold. TVs, appliances, paints, housewares, plumbing, heating, electrical, some toys. We had toys, magazines. I mean, pretty much everything that a small town would need, and people still talk about how they miss having a hardware store in town. Well, we just had, I guess I'd call them the old-fashioned cash register, where you punch the keys and pull the handle or whatever, and the drawer would pop open, and it didn't tell you how much change to make. They gave you $10 and their transaction was $8, then you'd count back to $2, and eventually we got not really a computer system in there, but a more modern cash register. I do a lot of volunteer work in town. I've been really active in our community club, which has done a lot for our city. Pretty much everything we do gets donated back to the city. We've done a lot down at the Ball Diamond, and we have a nice park down there now with playground equipment, and we've done a lot of redoing in the community club building. I've belonged to Homemakers ever since 1961, and I've been a secretary there for kind of as long as I can remember. I'm still the secretary treasurer there.
What is Homemakers?
You know, that started out, years ago. It was run through the Minnesota Extension Service. and they had extension agents in DL. My mother-in-law actually started the first club I belonged to, and we would go monthly during the winter months to Detroit Lakes, and there we would be presented material from the Minnesota Extension Office, and we would bring that back to our meetings and present the lessons, whatever they were. Sometimes they were a lot on gardening and cooking and health issues and things like that. We would bring them back to the club. Eventually, I think all the extension service kind of got phased out of the county. I believe they still do 4-H. But so now we just have our own little group. We meet monthly. We have like 13 members, and if somebody, the hostess has an interesting topic, then she'll present that, and we just visit and have lunch and coffee, and it's kind of a social outing. So it's something I really enjoy. I get involved in our church activities, not so much anymore now that I'm older, but I've done a lot of volunteer work there too. If I can help out, I'm sure ready to. That's another thing that this generation does not do. That's one reason I guess I enjoy homemakers, because you get to visit with the neighbors and stuff, and otherwise you see them and say hi at church or at the grocery store or whatever, and you just don't socialize like people did years ago. Just the newspapers, the telephone, everything, the communications part of it, the social media, which I, obviously at my age, don't do a whole lot of it. Can't even say I'm real comfortable with it. I do what I have to do online or whatever, but not anymore. Kind of strikes me as kind of funny when you're talking to somebody and they're going to look up a phone number and they look on their little telephone and I reach for the phone book. And then nowadays there aren't a whole lot of numbers in there anymore. Same with addresses. They go on their phone. I don't even know how to do that. And I look at the phone book, and it's just a whole different mindset with the younger generation than for my generation. And I think the next generation, maybe there won't be as many changes, as many differences from when I first started in the business world as when they're starting, unless things change a whole lot more in the next 20 years. Who knows? The other thing that we never dealt with, now things are on the news almost before they happened. I mean, years ago, I guess, like when my folks were young, I don't suppose they even knew Pearl Harbor had been bombed till a day or two later. Now it would be a special report on the news the minute it happened. So that's a big change that our younger people don't understand at all. They've just, everything's there right now. My siblings and I have been getting together the last couple of years just for 2 or 3 days at my brother's cabin, and we start reminiscing, and it's funny how each of us will remember different things, and we remember things differently. I probably, as the oldest in the family, remember things differently than my younger siblings do, because I probably saw them from a different aspect than they did. And they probably looked at me as the older sibling as being different than I looked at them as being younger.
Do you have any words of wisdom you would like to give to people?
Yeah, I guess I would just, wish that they're happy with what they're doing, happy with where they're at, happy with the choices they make. And I guess if their choices aren't good, then work to change them. I would just want them to be happy with where they're at and probably not try to keep up with the Joneses.
Essentia Health, our presenting sponsor, is proud to bring you Words of Wisdom. And TV3 and LB Video Productions.